Have you seen Making a Murderer? If so, then you know that there was a lot put into that documentary, including a deep dive into the judicial system of Wisconsin and how they absolutely had a wrong verdict given to the man known as Steven Avery once, and they might have done it twice. And ever since that documentary, many have come forward to try and help convince people that Avery is innocent. Despite that, the court system seems adamant to not hear out his pleas. And now, the state of Wisconsin itself, in terms of government, is trying to silence him. Allow us to show you Making a Murderer. The state asks the High Court to deny Steven Avery's request for review. Number 5. The Arrest of Avery for Murder, Part 1. To understand the fullness of the case, we have to look at both court cases that changed Avery's life. In July of 1985, a woman named Penny Bernstein was assaulted and violated while on a jog one day. During a photo lineup, she said it was Avery who was the attacker. One problem: Avery was 40 miles away in Green Bay shortly after the attack, an alibi supported by a time-stamped store receipt and 16 witnesses. That proves he didn't do it, except he was arrested and charged with the crime, getting 32 years in jail for it. What's worse is that 2 different appeal attempts were denied in subsequent years. In 1995, a detective made a call to the jail that Avery was at and noted that an inmate had admitted committing an assault years ago in Manitowoc County and that someone else was in jail for it. The sheriff at the jail didn't believe him, and thus Avery remained in jail. Finally, in 2002, the Innocent Project used DNA evidence to prove that Avery was innocent and that a man named Gregory Allen had done the deed, but his trials were only just beginning. Number 4. The Arrest of Avery for Murder, Part 2. Teresa Halbach was a simple photographer born in 1980. 25 years later, in early November, she went missing, and her parents called in to the police to let them know that their daughter was missing. Now, lest you think that her parents were just overreacting, they hadn't seen their daughter in days, and she honestly lived right next door to them. Halbach was known to have visited the Avery salvage yard in Manitowoc County on October 31, 2005, just days before her death. On November 10, 2005, following the discovery of her Toyota RAV4 vehicle partially concealed on the Avery property, Calumet County Sheriff Jerry Pagel conducted a search and found the charred remains of Halbach. Her cell phone, license plates, and car keys were also recovered. Fast forward a few days, and Steven Avery's blood was found in her vehicle, a clear sign that he was involved in part or in whole with what had happened to her. Avery was charged with the kidnapping and murder of Halbach, mutilation of a corpse, and illegal possession of a firearm. Number 3. The controversy in and out of court. There was a lot of controversy in the second case, including the county sheriffs and law enforcement who were involved in proving Avery guilty of the previous crime. They were allowed to investigate the new case despite there being a civil suit by Avery against them, and some of the key evidence was indeed found by them. That's a conflict of interest, and there was evidence that was clearly tampered with, which Avery's defense team has talked about repeatedly over the years. Another controversy that came about was that of his nephew, Brendan Ray Dassey, who confessed to helping Avery with the attack on Teresa. But later he recanted, as he said he was coerced by the cops as they didn't let him have a lawyer present, which should not have happened at all. Avery was found guilty of first-degree murder and illegal possession of a firearm and was sentenced to life in prison, as well as not getting the possibility of parole. Number 2. Making a Murderer. After the 2-part release of Making a Murderer on Netflix, many people started to question whether Avery was guilty or not, and new reports and evidence started to arise. People magazine reported that one of the Avery trial jurors was the father of a Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputy, and another juror's wife was a clerk with Manitowoc County. That's a clear violation of jury code and thus should have been handled, and yet it wasn't. Juror Richard Mahler, who was excused from the trial after the jury had begun deliberations because of a family emergency, he later said comments that early on, 7 of the jurors had voted not guilty. He was mystified that the jury eventually agreed on a guilty verdict. Mahler's account has been disputed by other jury members though. Another juror allegedly told the Making a Murderer filmmakers of feeling intimidated into returning a guilty verdict, fearing for personal safety. The filmmakers' claims have also been disputed. Avery and his legal team have been continuing to fight. But what's also true is that the state of Wisconsin has been fighting back against Avery as well. Number 1. The state fighting back against Avery. The state has filed a response to Steven Avery's attempt to get his case reviewed by the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Avery is appealing his conviction of first-degree intentional homicide for the 2005 murder of Teresa Hallback in Manitowoc County. The case gained international attention with the Netflix documentary series Making a Murderer. On September 8th, Attorney General Josh Kaul and Assistant Attorney General Lisa Comfer filed their response opposing Avery's petition for review. The state asks the Supreme Court to deny Avery's petition for review, saying he had egregiously misrepresented the record, the law, the lower court's opinions, and even his own arguments. The response read, "Even a casual review of the record shows that the Court of Appeals correctly applied the law and appropriately held that the Circuit Court was not required to hold a hearing on any of Avery's issues, because Avery's motions were all utterly devoid of factual support sufficient to lead to the conclusions Avery claimed. Avery's motions were insufficiently pled, and the Circuit Court had discretion to deny them without an evidentiary hearing. So, at best, Avery asks this court to engage in error correction of non-existent errors. This court is not an error-correcting court, and there is no compelling legal issue here that meets any of this court's criteria for review." The state also invoked making a murderer in its response. In short, despite what he appears to believe, the fact that Avery's case was the subject of a television show does not absolve him from following the well-established rules of Wisconsin procedure. It does not entitle him to a hearing on insufficiently pled claims based on only raw speculation and representations of the facts, and it does not entitle him to this court's review of a perfectly sound decision by the Court of Appeals. This case does not meet any of this court's criteria for review, and there are no compelling reasons for this court to hear it. Avery attorney Kathleen Zellner responded on Twitter, "If we had wanted to reread the same error-filled COA Court of Appeals decision again, we could have. The state's regurgitation response addresses none of these errors. It just repeats them. Justice delayed again for Steven Avery." In August, Zellner filed a petition for review with the state's high court, arguing for the justices to review 3 issues: ineffective assistance of counsel, Brady violations, and destruction of bone fragments. In July, an appeals court denied Avery an evidentiary hearing, siding with lower court rulings against Avery. The appeals court stated the lower court did not err in denying motions raising claims about evidence and effectiveness of Avery's trial attorneys. Avery also wanted the hearing to introduce evidence of a third-party suspect. Documents filed by the defense point a finger at Avery's nephew, Bobby Dassey. Mr. Avery presents this court with an opportunity to decide whether Mr. Avery has sufficiently alleged Brady claims warranting an evidentiary hearing, or in the alternative, a new trial. Third, Mr. Avery presents this court with the opportunity to fashion a remedy for a state actor's destruction of evidence in violation of Wisconsin Statute 968-205 and decide whether the violation of the statute is sufficient evidence of bad faith to warrant an evidentiary hearing on a Youngblood claim, or, in the alternative, grant Mr. Avery a new trial in the interest of justice. Petitioner Steven Avery respectfully asks this court to grant him leave to appeal the issues raised herein. The court as of yet has not made an official decision in regards to his petition, but if it is granted, it would be a very interesting thing to see unfold, especially if the state continues to try and scuttle his chances of appealing. So what do you think? What do you think of this look at how Steven Avery is trying to go and appeal the courts to look at his case again, only for the state to go and try to block it? Do you think it's proper for this to be happening like it is? Do you think that there are some ulterior motives going on with this? Or is the state merely trying to do its job by putting this case to rest for good? Let us know in the comments below, and we'll see you next time.